In January of 1968, the North Vietnamese forces launched the Tet Offensive. Prior to this offensive, it was believed that the North Vietnamese were on the brink of defeat, but the reality proved to be far different. They mounted a formidable attack, hitting key military and political targets across the country. Although the South Vietnamese and their American allies eventually repelled the communist forces, the psychological impact was immense. The U.S. had been deploying troops for 4 years, leading to public discontent with an unpopular draft. Any hope of an imminent withdrawal of the 500,000 stationed troops dissipated abruptly. In February of the same year, the United States suffered its highest death toll in a single week, with over 500 fatalities. The Viet Cong's guerrilla tactics, deadly traps, and landmines posed continuous threats, and these insurgents often hit among civilians, making it a challenging environment for American soldiers, particularly those of Charlie Company, part of the 11th Infantry Brigade. By March 1968, Charlie Company had already lost 28 soldiers to various causes, including Viet Cong snipers, landmines, and pitfall traps. As a response, they were assigned to a search and destroy mission in Sun Mai, a strategy frequently employed during the Vietnam War, where troops were rapidly deployed via helicopters to locate and neutralize enemy forces. Success was measured by the body count on such missions, as the traditional approach of capturing and holding land proved ineffective against the Viet Cong's tactics. Before the attack, Captain Ernest Medina, who led Charlie Company, had tolerated a certain level of violence from his soldiers, including using civilians to detect landmines and personally conducting violent interrogations of prisoners. This dehumanization of the Vietnamese civilian population set the stage for the tragic events to unfold. On the morning of the mission, around 7 a.m., Charlie Company landed outside Sun Mai under the command of Medina and 2nd Lieutenant William Kelly. Expecting strong resistance from a hardened battalion of Viet Cong, the soldiers were prepared to exact vengeance for their fallen comrades and inflict heavy casualties. However, upon arrival, they encountered ordinary villagers, including women, children, and elderly residents going about their daily routines. There was no sign of a significant Viet Cong presence, and not a single shot was fired at the approaching American soldiers. Despite this lack of resistance, the soldiers began rounding up the villagers and searching for any signs of the enemy or weapons. While they found minimal evidence, 3 old rifles, they proceeded to carry out the massacre. Some soldiers hesitated or refused to participate, but others followed orders, and chaos ensued as unarmed civilians, including women and children, were forced into ditches and gunned down. Lieutenant Kelly, convinced that everyone in the village was a threat, ordered the killings. Some women tried to protect their children, but the soldiers showed no mercy. Children who attempted to flee were targeted as well. In the end, approximately 500 Vietnamese civilians were killed by 11 a.m. Captain Medina reported the mission as a success to his superiors, falsely claiming that 100 Viet Cong had been killed, and no American soldiers were lost. Only one soldier had accidentally shot himself in the foot. The true horror of the massacre would come to light later, as survivors like Phan Thi Thursday Wan recounted their terrifying experiences. Amid the massacre, Warrant Officer Hugh Thompson, flying a scout helicopter, witnessed wounded civilians and marked their locations with smoke grenades to guide ground troops to help them. After refueling his helicopter, Thompson returned to My Lai to find the wounded villagers he had requested aid for, but to his dismay, they had already been killed. Alarmed by the sight, Thompson landed near a ditch and inquired about the situation. A large group of villagers had been herded into the ditch and shot. Among the corpses, he noticed some still alive and pleaded for assistance to help the wounded. The soldier he spoke to seemed to have relinquished his humanity, coldly stating that he was merely following orders and intended to end the suffering of the wounded. Shocked and horrified, Thompson watched from the air as the soldier callously fired into the ditch, extinguishing any glimmers of life left. As he hovered above the scene, Thompson noticed another group of women and children hiding in a bunker, seemingly unaware of the massacre happening nearby. Fearing for their lives, he made a daring decision. Thompson landed his helicopter between the two groups, acting as a barrier of protection. He issued a remarkable order to his dog gunner and crew chief. If the American soldiers were to open fire on the innocent civilians, Thompson's crew was to return fire against their own comrades. With immense courage, Thompson disembarked from the helicopter, determined to speak to the American soldiers and prevent further bloodshed. He managed to intervene and prevent the execution of the women and children in the bunker. Swiftly, a small group of villagers, including a young girl who had been rescued from a ditch of corpses, were airlifted away from the horrific scene. Callie received a life imprisonment sentence, but political interventions and appeals eventually reduced his punishment to house arrest at Fort Benning, where he served only 3 years. Strikingly, no other American soldier or officer was ever convicted for their involvement in the My Lai Massacre, raising questions about the military leadership's accountability and the use of the "I was just following orders" defense. The My Lai Massacre sent shockwaves through the American public and intensified opposition to the Vietnam War. Soldiers who had previously been seen as victims of the conflict were now perceived as perpetrators, branded with the label of baby killers. The public sentiment turned against the war, contributing to the eventual end of the conflict. Thompson and his crew, Lawrence Colburn and Glenn Andriota, were eventually recognized for their bravery and received the Soldiers' Medal for their extraordinary acts of courage in saving innocent lives. Thompson's intervention likely prevented further atrocities, sparing more innocent civilians from a gruesome fate. Remembering the victims of the My Lai Massacre is of utmost importance. Over 500 Vietnamese civilians lost their lives, including around 200 children, with some as young as 3 years old. The aftermath left the villagers devastated, finding their loved ones lying dead in ditches and along the roads.